Envy is one of the most misunderstood emotions we experience. It rarely announces itself clearly. It doesn't walk into your mind and say, "I am envy." Instead, it disguises itself as irritation, judgment, ambition, criticism, sadness, or even motivation. It blends into your everyday thoughts so smoothly that you may live with it for years without ever recognizing its presence. Yet, while it hides, it quietly reshapes your perceptions, influences your decisions, and alters your emotional well-being. Envy does not need dramatic moments to take hold. It grows in subtle comparisons, in silent scrolls through social media, in passing comments about someone's success, and in the uncomfortable tightness you feel when others achieve what you desire. It works behind the scenes, rewiring how you see yourself and the world around you. At its core, envy begins with comparison. The human brain is wired to evaluate. From an evolutionary standpoint, comparison helped us understand our standing within a group. It allowed us to measure our access to resources, status, and safety. But in the modern world, comparison has expanded far beyond survival. We compare lifestyles, relationships, physical appearances, careers, talents, and even happiness. The mind constantly scans for differences, and when it detects that someone else has something you value but lack, envy can arise almost automatically. What makes it powerful is that this process happens quickly and often unconsciously. Before you have time to rationalize or contextualize, your brain has already registered a perceived deficit. This perceived deficit is important. Envy does not necessarily arise because you are lacking something objectively. It arises because you interpret yourself as lacking relative to someone else. The mind creates a mental equation. They have something desirable. I do not. Therefore, I am behind. That equation, repeated often enough, becomes a narrative, and narratives shape identity. Without realizing it, envy can slowly shift how you define yourself. You may begin to see yourself as less successful, less attractive, less talented, or less fortunate. Even if your life is objectively fulfilling, the mental focus on what others have can overshadow what you already possess. One of the subtle ways envy affects your mind is through attention bias. When envy takes root, your brain becomes hyper-aware of evidence that reinforces the comparison. You start noticing more success stories, more achievements, more signs that others are ahead. It is not that the world suddenly becomes more competitive, it is that your mind selectively filters information. If you are envious of someone's career progress, you may fixate on promotions and accomplishments while ignoring your own steady growth. If you envy someone's relationship, you may magnify moments of their apparent happiness and minimize the complexity that likely exists beneath the surface. Envy narrows your focus, creating a distorted picture of reality. This distortion extends to how you interpret others' actions. When envy is present, neutral events can feel personal. A friend sharing good news may unconsciously feel like a reminder of your shortcomings. A colleague receiving praise might seem like a threat. The mind, operating under the influence of envy, can interpret ordinary success as competition. This interpretation activates subtle stress responses. You may feel tension in your body, irritability in your tone, or a desire to withdraw. Because these reactions seem disproportionate to the situation, you might not trace them back to envy. Instead, you might label them as being tired or in a bad mood, never recognizing the underlying emotional trigger. Envy also affects your self-talk in ways that are difficult to detect. When you compare yourself unfavorably to others, your inner dialogue can become harsher. You might think, "I should be further by now," or "Why can't I do that?" Over time, these thoughts create an internal environment of pressure and inadequacy. The danger lies in repetition. Thoughts that repeat often enough begin to feel like truths. Envy-driven self-criticism can erode self-esteem gradually. It does not happen overnight. It happens in small moments when you dismiss your accomplishments because someone else's seem more impressive. Another subtle impact of envy is emotional contamination. When you struggle to feel genuinely happy for others, you may experience guilt or shame. You might tell yourself that you are a bad friend for feeling competitive or resentful. This secondary layer of judgment compounds the emotional strain. Now you are not only envious but also critical of yourself for being envious. The mind becomes entangled in a loop. Comparison leads to envy. Envy leads to guilt. Guilt leads to self-criticism. Self-criticism reinforces feelings of inadequacy. All of this can unfold silently within you while you outwardly maintain composure. Envy can also shape your relationships in quiet but meaningful ways. If you consistently compare yourself to certain people, you may begin to distance yourself from them without fully understanding why. You might avoid conversations about their achievements. You might downplay their successes or subtly shift topics. These behaviors are often automatic defense mechanisms designed to protect your self-image. Yet over time, they can create emotional gaps. You may feel disconnected from people you care about, not because of anything they have done wrong, but because envy has made closeness feel threatening. On a cognitive level, envy influences how you construct narratives about fairness and justice. When someone achieves something you desire, your mind may search for explanations that preserve your self-worth. You might assume they had advantages you did not, that they were lucky, or that their success is temporary. While these thoughts can provide temporary relief, they also reinforce a scarcity mindset. Instead of seeing success as abundant or replicable, you may begin to view it as limited and competitive. This mindset can quietly increase anxiety, as the world begins to feel like a zero-sum game where someone else's gain implies your loss. Envy also affects motivation in complex ways. Sometimes it can push you to improve, to work harder, or to set higher goals. But when envy is unexamined, its motivational effects can become toxic. You may pursue achievements not because they align with your authentic values, but because they reduce uncomfortable comparisons. Your goals can shift from self-expression to social positioning. This shift often goes unnoticed. You may believe you are striving for success, but beneath the surface, you are striving for relief from envy. When motivation is rooted in avoidance rather than meaning, satisfaction tends to be short-lived. Even after reaching a goal, the mind may quickly find a new comparison target. The presence of social media has intensified the subtle impact of envy on the modern mind. Platforms designed for sharing highlights create curated realities. You are exposed to carefully selected moments of others' lives, often without context. The brain, however, processes these images and stories as data points in social comparison. Without realizing it, you may internalize unrealistic standards for happiness, productivity, beauty, or wealth. Because everyone appears to be thriving simultaneously, your mind may conclude that you are the exception. This conclusion can generate chronic low-level dissatisfaction, even when your life is objectively stable and meaningful. Another way envy operates quietly is by influencing your perception of time. When you compare your progress to others, you may feel behind schedule. You may believe you should have achieved certain milestones by now. This perceived lag can create urgency and restlessness. Instead of appreciating your current stage of life, you may fixate on closing a perceived gap. The mind begins to live in a constant state of catching up. This state can increase stress hormones and reduce your ability to experience present moment satisfaction. Over time, the habit of comparing timelines can rob you of patience and gratitude. Envy can also affect creativity. When you constantly measure your ideas against those of others, you may become hesitant to express yourself. Fear of being outshined or judged can suppress experimentation. The mind, seeking to avoid further comparison-based discomfort, may choose safety over originality. You might stick to what is familiar rather than risk exposing your work to evaluation. In this way, envy can quietly limit your potential. It narrows your willingness to take creative risks, not because you lack ability, but because you fear reinforcing the narrative that you are less capable. Physiologically, envy activates stress responses similar to other forms of social threat. The brain interprets unfavorable comparisons as potential risks to status or belonging. Even if the threat is symbolic rather than literal, the body may respond with increased heart rate, muscle tension, and heightened alertness. When comparisons are frequent, these subtle stress responses can accumulate. Chronic low-grade stress can impact sleep, concentration, and mood. You may feel mentally fatigued without understanding why. The source might not be workload or external pressure, but the internal strain of ongoing comparison. Envy also shapes memory. When you are preoccupied with what you lack, your brain may store memories in ways that reinforce that focus. You might vividly remember moments when others succeeded but struggled to recall your own achievements. This selective memory strengthens the belief that you are perpetually behind. The mind becomes a biased historian, documenting evidence that supports the envy narrative while overlooking contradictory data. Over time, this bias can make it difficult to feel confident, even in areas where you have objectively excelled. Another subtle effect of envy is emotional numbing. When comparisons repeatedly trigger discomfort, you may unconsciously dampen your emotional responses to protect yourself. You might become less enthusiastic about others' successes or less expressive about your own aspirations. This dampening can reduce overall emotional richness. While it shields you from acute envy, it also limits your capacity for genuine joy and connection. The mind, in trying to avoid pain, inadvertently suppresses pleasure. Envy can even influence your moral judgments. When someone you envy experiences a setback, you may feel a fleeting sense of relief or satisfaction. This reaction can be deeply unsettling because it conflicts with your values. The mind may quickly justify the feeling by reframing the situation as deserved or inevitable. These justifications protect your self-image but also reveal how envy can distort empathy. It subtly shifts your emotional alignment, making it harder to celebrate others wholeheartedly. One of the most insidious aspects of envy is how it can masquerade as ambition. You may believe that your drive for improvement is purely positive, when in fact it is fueled by comparison-based insecurity. While ambition itself is not harmful, ambition rooted in envy often lacks contentment. No matter how much you achieve, the goalpost moves. There is always someone further ahead. This endless ladder can create chronic dissatisfaction. The mind becomes conditioned to seek validation externally rather than cultivating internal measures of worth. Envy also interacts with identity. If you strongly identify with a particular role or trait, seeing someone excel in that domain can feel like a threat to your sense of self. For example, if you see yourself as the creative one, encountering someone more creative can destabilize your identity. The mind may respond defensively, minimizing the other person's talent or questioning its authenticity. These defenses operate quickly and often unconsciously. They are attempts to preserve coherence in your self-concept. However, they also prevent growth, because acknowledging others' strengths can be a pathway to learning. The cumulative effect of unrecognized envy can be a persistent undercurrent of dissatisfaction. You may feel as though something is missing, even when external circumstances are stable. This feeling can drive you to seek constant upgrades, whether in possessions, achievements, or relationships. Yet because the root issue lies in comparison rather than actual deficiency, external changes rarely resolve the discomfort. The mind continues scanning for the next gap. Awareness is the first step in reducing envy's hidden influence. When you pause to notice your emotional reactions to others' successes, you create space between stimulus and response. Instead of automatically interpreting someone's achievement as evidence of your inadequacy, you can question the narrative. Is their success truly a reflection of your failure? Or is your mind constructing a competitive framework that may not be necessary? By examining these questions, you begin to loosen envy's grip. Cultivating gratitude can also counteract envy's effects. When you deliberately focus on what is present and valuable in your life, you shift attention away from deficits. This does not mean ignoring aspirations or pretending comparisons do not exist. It means broadening your perspective so that others' gains do not eclipse your own assets. Gratitude trains the mind to recognize abundance rather than scarcity. Developing self-compassion is equally important. Envy often thrives in environments of harsh self-judgment. When you treat yourself with understanding and patience, unfavorable comparisons lose some of their sting. You acknowledge that growth takes time, that everyone's path is unique, and that temporary feelings of envy are part of being human. Self-compassion does not eliminate comparison, but it softens its emotional impact. Reframing others' successes as evidence of possibility rather than threat can transform envy into inspiration. When you see someone achieve something meaningful, you can interpret it as proof that such achievements are attainable. This shift requires conscious effort because the mind's default may be competitive. However, with practice, you can train yourself to respond with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Ultimately, envy affects your mind without you realizing it because it operates in ordinary moments. It hides in passing thoughts, subtle tensions, and quick judgments. It shapes attention, memory, motivation, and identity. It influences relationships and self-perception, yet because it rarely announces itself dramatically, you may attribute its effects to other causes. By bringing it into awareness, you reduce its power. Envy loses much of its influence when it is named, examined, and understood. The goal is not to eliminate envy entirely. As a human emotion, it carries information about your desires and values. When recognized consciously, it can reveal what matters to you. The problem arises when envy remains hidden, quietly distorting perception and undermining well-being. By paying attention to your comparisons, softening your self-talk, and expanding your sense of abundance, you can prevent envy from silently shaping your mind. In doing so, you reclaim your ability to define your worth on your own terms rather than through the shifting lens of comparison.